I had gastric sleeve surgery, so this is going to be specific to my journey. Someone else who might have had the same surgery might have had a completely different experience than me, and someone who had a different type of bariatric surgery like the gastric bypass might have also had a different experience as well. My recovery was actually pretty good. I don't really have any horror stories to tell about it because everything went according to plan, but I'll still tell you about the different things that I went through and what to expect after having surgery. So I arrived at the hospital around 6 a.m. on December 8th, 2020, and my husband Tom had the same surgery on the same day by the same surgeon right after me. So for 7 days prior to having surgery, we were both on a clear liquid diet, which meant for 7 straight days, all that we could have was clear liquid, like broth, sugar-free Jell-O, water, and popsicles. And no protein shakes, no milk, nothing that you couldn't see directly through. My mom dropped us both off at the hospital because it was during the pandemic and we couldn't have any visitors there. And literally right as we pulled up, there's a delivery van in front of us, and they're delivering hundreds of donuts to the hospital staff. Hundreds. And they all smelled so freaking amazing. And Tom and I are just like, why does this have to happen right now while we're on a clear liquid diet about to go in for bariatric surgery? So that was a real struggle, but we knew exactly what we were there for, so we just beelined straight for the surgery area. And of course, there were donuts everywhere that we went. But anyway, we got all checked in, and my surgery was about 9 o'clock in the morning, and it lasted about an hour or two. I do remember immediately after surgery, they were wheeling me back to the recovery room, and they woke me up and they're like, "Hey Megan, you're out of surgery now. How are you feeling?" And I'm like in my super groggy anesthesia brain, and I'm like, "I'm Silage." And they're like, "What?" And I'm like, "Silage." And they're like, "What?" And I'm like, "I'm jealous. I'm jealous." And then I just went back to sleep. And I know that I was talking about the donuts, but they didn't know that, so they probably thought I was some kind of freak. So great, I've got that on my record now. Now, Tom, on the other hand, had a much different reaction to waking up after surgery. And we laugh about it now, but at the time it was probably really scary for him, but looking back, it was just ridiculous. So before surgery, he had severe sleep apnea and type 2 diabetes, which are both gone now, by the way, but both of those things together would always cause him to have a very dry mouth. And during surgery, they put a tube down your throat, and it does cause a little bit of like throat irritation and some additional dry mouth. But I guess in his groggy anesthesia brain, he must have just thought that his mouth and throat were gone or something, or taken away, because as soon as they woke him up, he was in a sudden panic. His mouth and his throat were so dry that he thought that he couldn't breathe, which he could breathe, by the way, but he didn't think that he could. So he just starts like flailing around like, "Oh my God, I can't breathe, I can't breathe." And the nurses literally had to come back and be like, "Hey, stop talking. You are scaring all the other patients. You've got to chill." We don't know to this day if he just fell back to sleep or if they put him back to sleep, but he doesn't really remember anything after that. But he could breathe the entire time, but his mouth was just so dry that he thought that he couldn't. And I'm sure that in the moment that was really scary for him, but now we just kind of like look back on that like, what in the world? That was so silly and ridiculous. But anyway, after the recovery room, we each went back to our own rooms, and I guess I rested for about an hour or so. And then after about an hour, the nurses came in and they're like, "All right, time to go for a walk." And I'm like, "What? I just woke up from surgery." But they were serious, so that was pretty crazy. Within an hour, I was up and walking around, and I wasn't really in any pain to be able to do that. So I was able to just walk around the hospital, do several laps. And I want to say I did that about 15 minutes every hour or so. And the reason that they have you walk so quickly after surgery is to help with the gas pains and to prevent blood clots. And I did have some slight gas pain just underneath my ribs, but the more that I walked, the more that went away. So if you end up having surgery and you have a lot of gas pains, walking is going to be the best way to get rid of that pain. And it did just kind of depend on how I positioned myself, but it was never really any like extreme pain that I couldn't just breathe through. I want to say that it stuck around for a few days after surgery before it completely went away. While I was in the hospital, I don't recall ever needing to ask ask for additional medication for pain. However, Tom and I both had this pain ball thing that hung around our necks by this little pouch, and then there was this tube that came out of the pouch and it went into our stomachs right here. And we actually ended up having to go home with that still in our bodies, which was insane because neither of us are like bodily fluid needle people, but I'm gonna get back to that in just a minute. As far as the incisions went, we each had either 3 or 4 incisions. So there were a few smaller ones up top, and that's because the surgery is done laparoscopically. And then there's a larger one a little bit further down. Mine is actually like halfway across my belly button. And the larger incision that they made is where they pull the portion of your stomach that they remove out. As far as the incision pain goes, it really wasn't too bad. It was just kind of like muscle soreness. So it just kind of felt like I did a really intense ab workout, and that was there for maybe a week or so, but that really wasn't too extreme. It was just kind of like general muscle soreness whenever I would move. We both stayed in the hospital for just one night, and really it was just for observation, just to make sure that everything went smoothly and we didn't have any problems. So they sent us home with some liquid hydrocodone, and honestly, beyond the gas pains and that general achy muscle pain, I don't recall having too much pain once we were home. The first few nights after surgery, sleeping was definitely a little uncomfortable. I've always been a side sleeper, and when I would lay on my side, it was kind of like all of my fat was like being pulled by gravity towards the bed, and that did make the incisions hurt pretty bad. I kind of had to adjust for a little bit to sleep on my back the first few nights, or if I just kind of like put a pillow underneath my stomach so it wouldn't pull so hard down to the bed, it wasn't so bad. But again, that went away after like a week or two, and then I was able to get back to sleeping like normal. And then waking up in the morning was also pretty tough because you can't really use your stomach muscles at all for the first week or so. So you had to completely rely on the rest of your body to get you up out of bed. But after a week or so, that pain all went away, and it was pretty manageable beyond that. We don't have a recliner, but I bet having a recliner would have made that part a lot easier to get up and out of bed rather than trying to crawl out of bed the way that we were. Okay, so back to that pain ball thing. So after about 3 or 4 days, all of the pain medicine that was in that ball did go away into our bodies. And at that point, once all of the medicine was gone, we had to pull it out. And like I said, Tom and I are not needle or bodily fluid people, so this was very alarming for us to have to do ourselves. Now, it didn't have a needle. They were literally just like little tubes that were going into the middle of our stomachs, but this was still so scary to me. I've literally passed out from getting an IV before, so I don't do things that are injected into my body very well at all. And my one regret is not getting this whole experience of us pulling these things out of our stomachs on camera, because I bet we looked insane. We both sat down on the couch next to each other and we just kind of like counted to 3 and just pulled it out. And I'm betting you we probably laid there just like with our heads on the couch for like 15 minutes afterwards, because it was so just awful for us. It didn't hurt to pull it out, but it's just because we're not needle body fluid type of people, and it was just the worst experience of this whole thing. It was just pulling that pain pump out of our stomachs. Now, I have not seen that everyone who gets surgery has to do that. That's only some people, but just be prepared for that to happen if you get that pain pump thing and you have to take it out yourself at home, because that was really rough. Moving on from that, the first month or 2 after having surgery, I did notice that I had a little bit of an increase in heartburn, and that can be very common in gastric sleeve patients. And for that first month or 2, it really did seem like pretty much anything that I consumed, even water, would give me heartburn. So I definitely took a lot of Zantac, but it did go away after a little while. And now that I'm a little past 1 year post-op, I will say that getting heartburn is super rare for me. And if I do ever get it, it's because I either ate too much or I ate something really spicy. So it's very rare at this point, but it was very frequent for me for the first month or two after having surgery. Beyond that, the only other pain that I really remember feeling was when I first started introducing solid foods again. And this is something that you kind of learn to adjust to, but as you start eating solid foods again for the first time after having surgery, you really have to know how long you need to chew and how much you can actually take in at once. So I was probably 4 weeks post-op and I had 3 chicken wings on my plate. I made it through about 1.5 chicken wings before my stomach was full. And this was the first solid food that I had had in well over a month. I guess I either ate it way too fast or I didn't chew it enough, but it did make this feeling like it was stuck at the bottom of my esophagus, at the top of my stomach. And it almost felt like I was in labor because it was like this contraction feeling as my stomach was like trying to process this food. And it was very painful. I won't even lie, that was very painful. And I did end up throwing up, but after I threw up, all the pain was gone, like instantly. And that was something that it's just kind of a learning experience, and it probably will happen if you have surgery. But once I kind of learned where my limits were, that's only happened like twice since I've had surgery. But overall, the recovery was really smooth. I was able to lift things again about 1 month post-op, and I had no complications with my surgery. So let me know in the comments if you've had surgery and if you had any similar experiences. I love reading all of your stories and your feedback. So if you liked this video, go ahead and smash that like button and hit the big red subscribe button if you haven't subscribed already. And you can check out any of these videos here for additional videos on my weight loss journey. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye everyone!